Greetings and welcome to another edition of Sports Sidelines. I'm Dave Clifton. I'll be your host for the next half hour. We'll be talking sports and recreation. And now we've had an opportunity to speak to some professional athletes, some college athletes and coaches. We've had the opportunity to also chat with high school coaches and principals. Today we're going to speak with a fan. And you know, fans are on the sidelines, and certainly I'm happy to be able to have as our guest today Sid Rosen, who's a very big fan in Hockomock League sports. Again, I'm here today to be your host. My co-host and good friend Ron Sanders is not with us today. He has another commitment. But we thought it would be nice to be able to speak to a fan who sits on the sidelines, critiques all the games and the contests that take place. And Sid, thank you so much for joining us here on Sports Sidelines.
My pleasure, Dave. Glad to be here.
Sid, I know that you've been a sports fan for many years. Let me start off by asking you, what sports do you enjoy being a fan at the most? Is it college? Is it the professional athletes, watching them perform? Or is it high school sports?
I live for Patriots football, and then I live even more for high school hoops, especially the high school tournament where I can be in a gym every night and watch two great teams participate. And then when that's over, I take a breath for a week and watch the NCAA tournament, and those are my big three.
And that's March Madness, of course. I always enjoy watching that. But as a kid growing up, I used to go into the old Boston Garden and watch the Tech tournament, high school teams. Spend the whole weekend there watching game after game. How exciting that was, and to see how some of those athletes moved on to college ball. And we've had a couple that have actually become professional athletes. But you've watched the Hockomock League competition for many years. Teams from Oliver Ames, Foxborough, Canton, Sharon, and of course teams like the Franklin High Panthers, King Philip High School, the Red Rocketeers of North Attleboro. Very enjoyable. What a great league the Hockomock League is, not just in basketball, but as well in football and baseball and even gymnastics. I mean, it's an exciting opportunity to watch kids develop. How important do you think sports are to an individual athlete?
I'll answer that very simply. When I moved to Sharon and my kids got old enough, I built a basketball court in the backyard. And I knew that if I had the basketball court in the backyard and the balls were sitting in the porch that anybody could get to, that all the kids would be playing basketball in my backyard and not being somewhere else, tempted by all kinds of troubles that exist in the world today. I quietly channeled my kids into playing sports all year round and enjoyed the camaraderie with the parents, enjoyed watching the kids grow up. And that's how I kind of got into high school basketball, because after watching the kids play rec basketball and travel team basketball, for example, then I get to watch them play high school ball, and in some instances, college ball as well. So that's what kind of turned me on to this whole thing of being a sports fan.
How right you are, Sid, when you talk about other alternatives that are out there for young people. But by participating in sports or even extracurricular activities, I think it ties up a lot of their time, and it gets them involved in competition, teaches them sportsmanship. It teaches them how to get along with their peers. Certainly, I think you agree with that concept.
Sports isn't just sports itself. It's learning teamwork and sportsmanship and respect for your teammates, respect for your coaches, respect for the referees. And there are so many values that you learn through sports. Sports is a medium to growing as an individual and to working with other people, because you're going to spend your whole life working with people in your profession. And you might as well learn as a youngster how to get along with other people.
It's interesting, we've had an opportunity to speak to lots of athletes, but here we have a show that's called Sports Sidelines, and today we have an opportunity to speak to someone who's on the sidelines watching all these events. Certainly you don't criticize referees or officials. Are you the same Sid Rosen I know of?
No, you know what? In all the years I coached, and in all the years that I've watched primarily basketball, the only time I ever criticized a referee was when I saw kids getting hurt because they weren't blowing the whistle and allowing too much physical interplay. And other than that, I never got a technical foul. I once tried refereeing when you and I were coaching youth basketball in Sharon, realized how difficult a job it was, and never opened up my mouth again after that. And that was a long time ago.
Sid, how do you feel about parents coaching their kids in youth sports?
I have mixed opinions on that, and I'll tell you why. When I was running rec programs in Sharon, a couple of high school kids came up to me and said, "Hey, Mr. Rosen, can we coach a team?" And I thought about it, and I said, "You know what? If you will be volunteer assistant coaches for a year, I want to see how you interact with the kids. And if you do a nice job, I'll let you take your own team." So they did that. Following year, I stepped out of coaching in the program that I was coordinating, let them coach. And now in the town of Sharon, and I'm sure many other towns, there's a lot of high school kids coaching. And the kids look upon these high school kids as big brothers. Whereas the fathers, they always look at them as fathers, and they can't accept them as coaches. So for up to me, I'd get rid of all the parents, and I'd have high school kids doing the rec programs and letting them give back to the community.
Unfortunately, there are a few adults out there in our great Commonwealth that cross the line in terms of coaching youth sports. In many cases, especially at the lower grade levels, they seem to get very much involved in winning at all costs, not realizing that you can't take winning out of the game. But in the early stages, in the first grade, second grade, third grade, fourth grade, these are young people who are learning how to play the game, and I think the fundamentals are important. Unfortunately, some parents, not everybody, they cross the line, and they realize that they had an opportunity to play at one particular day, and they wanted to make sure that their youngster was playing at a top level, when really they should be learning how to play the game. They should be learning how to get along with their peers. Is that something that you've noticed over the years? Not so much in the league you were in, but you read about it.
It's been a problem forever. I think it's gotten worse over time because parents too often feel like they're entitled and they know more than anybody else. And many years ago, I proposed a solution to a young man named Kevin Talcott, who was your assistant over at Sharon High. And I said to him, in the third grade games, you should make every parent referee one game. And if they had to come out on the floor and realized how difficult it was to referee one game, you would have gotten rid of most of all of the complaining and whining that goes on by parents who never coached, never did the book, never did the clock, never participated in any way, shape, or form in running the program, other than opening up their mouths and complaining about the people doing the job.
Of course, I feel very strongly in the early stages of basketball, if we're talking about that sport now, it should be strictly the fundamentals, learning how to play the game. And sometimes adult coaches don't realize that there's only a handful of kids that actually make their high school team. There's less that make their college team, and certainly how many make the professional team. I know that most of them play the game because they should be playing to have fun, and at the same time, an opportunity to get involved in competition and teamwork. So that it's a very small handful that actually get an opportunity to play at the professional ranks and forget about even making the high school basketball team. Certainly, Sid, you've seen a lot of those players. I think we met one the other day, Rick Shantz, who went on and played college basketball. What an outstanding high school player he was. And you remember those two brothers that played at North Attleboro High School?
The Babels.
The Babel twins. One played at Georgia, and I think
UMass.
one played at
Calipari.
UMass. That's right. So that Rick Shantz was a player that played at Sharon High School, and there's been some outstanding players that played at Oliver Ames High School as well as Foxborough. What do you think about the Hockomock League?
People don't appreciate the level of competition in the Hockomock League. It's kids that have all played travel team ball against each other from grade 4 on. So they all know each other, having competed against each other for 5 years. The quality of the Hockomock League is phenomenal. There's a lot of kids who really enjoy the game of basketball. And where you see the strength of the Hockomock League is not so much in the league itself, but when these teams get to the state tournament. For example, Sharon High, who I think was seeded number 13, knocked off the number 2 seed in the tournament in their division in one of the greatest games I'd ever seen. And ironically, they did it about 5 or 6 years earlier, same thing. So you really see the talent come out in the state tournament, because as you follow the tournament and teams get knocked out, come the end of the tournament, the Final 4 or the Final 8, you'll find at least a half a dozen Hockomock teams still alive and competing.
It's amazing. There's lots of leagues scattered throughout the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, but a lot of the parochial Catholic high schools have very competitive teams at the high school level in all sports, and I think that has an awful lot to do with kids come from surrounding towns to attend those schools, so they probably have more athletes involved. Do you agree with that?
There's always a lot of controversy every year during the state tournament about private schools should be participating in their own tournament, because they do have the ability to go out and recruit kids from multiple towns, whereas towns like Sharon and Canton and all the other Hockomock towns, they only have the kids who are in that town to participate. And I've spoken to different coaches about it. Some of them are very unhappy about the situation. Others just kind of throw their hands up in the air and accept it for what it is.
How sports have changed over the years, and I think about the contact sports that take place today in high school sports. You hear an awful lot about concussions, and I think for many years people were in denial if someone got injured, especially a head injury in a contact sport. When we talk about concussion, we're talking about serious brain damage that we have to be aware of. But the equipment's changed today. Even a helmet is much more suitable for a contact sport like football than what we used to have years ago. They've certainly worked on that. How do you feel about that? We know we've heard an awful lot. Just a few weeks ago, we spoke with Nate Solder, who's the left tackle for the New England Patriots, and he was out on the sidelines for a while because of a concussion. How do you feel that something like that should be treated by a coach at the high school level and in youth sports?
The reality is we know a lot more today about the problem of football with its concussions and injuries and things like that than we knew 20, 30 years ago. And so fortunately, there's a lot, excuse me, there's a lot of work underway to make better uniforms, to make better padding, to make better helmets. But still, football's got a long way to go before it becomes a much safer sport to play. And one of the things that's going on now is there's far fewer kids playing Pop Warner football based on what everybody knows about the health risks. So I don't know how that's going to play out, but I think the sport of football has to be made a lot safer. And I'm a football fan. I love pro football. I love college football. But yet, I don't want to see anybody hurt. I don't want to see anybody get a concussion or a broken bone or whatnot. So that's a work in progress.
Yeah, and I'm sure that there are other parents out there in our viewing audience that have different opinions of that. I know that training is important, getting players into the appropriate shape physically so that they can handle, and teaching them how to block and how to run and all those kinds of things, and how to tackle, how to fall down. Those are things that coaches should work on today, which makes me think about in youth sports, Sid Rosen. We always had that philosophy that coaches coach, parents parents, and let the players play. And those people involved shouldn't be crossing the line.
And the referee is referee.
That's correct.
That's one of the most important aspects.
Yeah. And as you take a look on the sidelines, if you go to a youth sports competitive game, you'll see parents on the sidelines. Some sit and watch the game. Some spend a lot of time attacking the officials. Some are much more concerned about playing time for their kids. And coaches, I think, should be participating in training workshops. Let's talk about that because I think that's important. A training workshop for a volunteer coach in a youth sports program should be a must in every town and city, not just in the Hockomock area, but in high school sports in general. Providing training on the psychology of coaching, how to handle a kid, how to make sure that the youngster is wearing the appropriate equipment for participating, teaching them the fundamentals of the game, teaching them how to get along with each other. Because when you talk about an athlete, you're talking about total development of an individual, not just someone who gets great grades in school, and we emphasize how important that is, but someone who can participate in extracurricular activities so that they can be a full-rounded person. How do you feel about that?
I think it's one of the best things that could happen is for parents to get training in terms of coaching. A lot of times a person is coaching who played the sport but really doesn't know how to interact with the kids, doesn't understand the teaching aspect that is involved with teaching kids. My own experience was seat of the pants. And so I kind of learned from others like yourself and other people much more experienced in coaching and working with kids. And like everybody else, made my mistakes, but over a number of years, I got to be pretty good at really watching out for the kids. I thought of myself more as a teacher than a coach. And I brought that perspective to what I did. I did things like, I didn't have to start the starting five every game, for example. If I knew I had a weak opponent, I could start some of the kids at the end of the bench. It was a confidence-building situation. And my favorite one, and people used to laugh at this, we used to call it the Bobby Zadie rule, which was if some kid, grandmother or grandfather happened to show up for the game, I'd give the kid extra time, I might start him, because that worked well for everybody, especially the grandmother and the grandfather. So, but teaching, you have to know how to teach. Coaching isn't just yelling at the kid and this is make a layup. You really do have to teach. You really sometimes have to be a surrogate parent. We've both had kids that we've coached that we used to have to go pick up for every game because we knew they had no other way to get to the gym. So I agree with you wholeheartedly. We need training for all the coaches.
I used to have a video that I'd share with parents and volunteer coaches over the years. And this video was entitled What Not to Do in a Youth Sports Program. And it showed a picture of a baseball team, and someone hit a fly ball to center field, and the coach started yelling at the player and took him right out of the game. The kid made his way to the bench in tears because he came out of the game and because he missed the ball. Well, that's certainly something that you shouldn't do. And then there was another part of the video that showed how a coach was constantly yelling at the umpire to the point where he wasn't looking like a good role model to young kids sitting on the bench. Those are the kinds of things that I wanted to share with volunteer coaches to let them know that this is not the appropriate behavior for working with youngsters. Like I said earlier, not everyone is going to make their high school team, and not everyone's going to make their college or professional team. Certainly we hope they do, and if they do, we hope that they'll give us the first 2 tickets, Sid, to that professional game. But I did want to ask you, as a fan sitting in the stands, it must be very gratifying to you to have worked with youngsters in a youth sports atmosphere, watch them grow up, and then participate at the high school level. Wasn't it very satisfying to be able to see something like that happen?
When you've spent 4 or 5 or 6 years working with kids from grades 2 up to 8, you develop a relationship with these kids. You develop a relationship with their parents. So you become one big happy family. So that when they get to high school, you're allowed to continue these relationships with the kids, with the families, and it's a wonderful thing. And I'll tell you what's very interesting. I got onto Facebook a number of years ago, and the reason I got onto Facebook was I said one day, I want to know what's happened to all the kids I used to coach, and where are their parents? And now I have about 300 friends on Facebook, and I get these friend requests from some kid who is in the middle of the country and said, Mr. Rosen, this is my 7-year-old son in his football uniform. I wanted you to meet him. And that is so rewarding and so wonderful to have watched these kids grow up and to still be part of their life now that they're 20, 30, 40 years old.
It's interesting to see how they develop, and even a youngster who's participating in a youth sports program may not be the same player that's going to start on his or her high school team because they develop differently. And at the early stages, their skills might be a little bit more perfected than someone else, and all of a sudden somebody decides to play more basketball or baseball at the junior high school level or middle school, and they develop and they end up starting on their team. So it's not necessarily, if a youngster starts on their youth sports program, that they're going to be the player to look or to watch at the high school level.
When I used to run travel team tryouts at the younger grades, 4, 5, and 6, I would tell everybody, I said, at least one starter on the varsity has not made the travel team yet. And I said, that's because people grow over time. Kids grow 4 or 5 inches over summer. Kids get focused on playing basketball. They go to basketball camps. They work very hard. And you talked earlier about Mike Shantz from Sharon. I remember Mike growing up, and he was no taller than any of the other kids. And one summer, he had about a 4 or 5 inch growth spurt and really got into the game of basketball. And all of a sudden, I'm hearing how he's going to be this phenomenal basketball player as a sophomore. And I said, are we talking about the same Mike Shantz? Because he was a good player, but he was not a standout player. And all of a sudden, his sophomore year in high school, he was phenomenal, going for 20 points a game, was a college All-American at Hamilton College, and played pro ball over in Europe for a number of years. So you never know. You can't project at grade 4 who's going to be playing ball at grade 12.
And then you've got some outstanding girls basketball players like Sarah Bain over there in Foxborough, who broke some records. Went on to play at Boston College. You had some outstanding athletes right here playing the game of basketball here for Oliver Ames High School here in Easton. And you mentioned when we were off the air a couple of players that did very well.
I'll tell you a great Sarah Bain story. I wanted to see her play in the worst way when she was in high school. So one day I'm in my office, which was in Newton. My son Peter calls me, said, Dad, Sarah Bain is coming to Sharon High. Foxborough girls are playing Sharon today. I ran into my boss's office. I said, I got to go. I have an emergency at home. And I raced to the gym, and I watched her play. I have never seen a more dominant female basketball player in my life. I think she went for 35 points that day. And everybody in the stands, their mouths were just open. They couldn't believe the talent. And now she's come back around as a coach and has done a fabulous, fabulous job coaching.
It's amazing how the game of basketball has changed for girls. I remember back in the early days when I was a kid, they could only go half court with the offense and half with the defense. It was a different game. And now it's changed, and we've had some outstanding athletes in the Hockomock League who have gone on and played college basketball. And I think it's a tribute to the youth sports programs, giving them all an opportunity to at least participate. Let's talk about the pros for a minute, if we may. I know we didn't talk about a couple of players that we'd like to mention from Oliver Ames High School. You mentioned one earlier.
There were 2 kids I coached against who were unbelievable basketball players. One was Amos Anderson.
He turned out to be an all-scholastic.
Whose father, Paul, also played at Oliver Ames High School. And tremendous battles every time we competed. This kid in grade 4 went for 20 points a game. And then years later, when I was coaching another group, I ran into a young man named Chris Tye, whose father, Brad, I believe also played for Oliver Ames High School, and he was coaching. 7 games a year, knockdown, drag-em-out fights, and over the course of our interactions, we probably played 35 games each one of them, and
it wasn't easy to get a ticket to watch an Oliver Ames Sharon basketball game. Thank God I was the broadcaster, so I had a chance to get in. Bob Sondheim and myself used to do a lot of those games, and they were exciting from start to finish.
Thank God I'd leave work early to make sure I could be there by the JV game, because you're right, some of those games you couldn't get in if you showed up too late.
That goes back to Val Moscato as the head basketball coach. His son later became the head coach at Oliver Ames High School. Dudley Davenport was the head basketball coach and athletic director for the Sharon Eagles, and how competitive that was over the years. No doubt about it.
Well, Dudley was a little bit before my time. I didn't get into basketball in Sharon until my kids started playing, and I felt really bad about that later on, because living across the street from me was Bobby Leeborn, who was a team captain, and he used to play with my kids all the time. They'd come over and he'd show them how to shoot baskets. And I regret now not taking the kids to watch when these kids were playing. I think at the time Basil Cronin had probably become the coach. I don't think Dudley was coaching when I moved to town.
And Sid Rosen, I know that you and I both agree that there's many more good things that happen in youth sports programs than the bad things that we don't like to talk about. Unfortunately, it grows into the college area as well as the NBA. We recently heard about Don Sterling, the owner of the Los Angeles Clippers. He was banned from NBA basketball for his racist talk, and rightfully so. I mean, that kind of stuff cannot be tolerated at any level of sports, and especially NBA.
I used to teach my kids about values, and respect was one of the values I tried teaching them. And I, over the years, when we would run into the one bad apple as a coach or somebody else, I would take the time to point out the problem. But I told everybody, 95% of the people we're going to meet on this journey are going to be really wonderful people. To see in today's society a man who was so willing to voice racial prejudice the way this man did is mind-boggling in a league where 85% of the players are African American. It's just absolutely mind-boggling to me. And my hope is the NBA will be able to get him out as owner of the team, because next year, if he's still around, I would expect Doc Rivers to resign. I would expect half the players not to be willing to take the court, just to make a stand.
Well, that kind of thing is certainly unacceptable, and I think that the players at the professional level, as well as the coaches and the owners, I think all concur on this. I think you'll find that Don Sterling will be gone for a lifetime as an owner in that franchise, or any franchise for that matter. I know that we've had the opportunity to watch lots of professional athletes and how time changes. We go from the era of the Boston Bruins and the Bobby Orr days, where they were very victorious. The Boston Celtics with Bill Russell. That must be someone calling into our show.
I apologize. I thought I had shut this off.
The fact is that things change. What goes around comes around. It's the same thing in high school sports. One team may dominate a sport, and then all of a sudden someone else comes around. Who would ever think that the Sharon High Eagles would win the Super Bowl in football? They excelled in tennis, in basketball, and baseball, but football was never, they were never on the top of the league. How times change.
What's really wonderful about sports is the underdog who all of a sudden has this amazing season and wins it all. And Sharon High winning the football Super Bowl was, without a doubt, the most amazing sports activity in Sharon. I think it was even greater than winning the state title in basketball, because basketball has always been a predominant sport in Sharon. Football never got the recognition it deserved, and you'd go to the games and most of the people there would be one or two people like me and all the parents. So to have the year that they did and to win the Super Bowl, and I was there at the championship game, and oh my God, I remember saying to a friend of mine, I said, you know, if in the third period Asnes can get the ball and run for a touchdown, I said we could win this game. And I think it was 2 plays later, they handed the ball to Sean Asnes, and he ran 70 yards in the snow to put us up 13-3. And we all started looking at each other like, oh my God, is this really going to happen?
It does happen. And how successful a lot of these sports teams have been here at Oliver Ames High School. Mansfield has been very dominating recently in football. And certainly the Red Rocketeers at North Attleboro, everybody in the town had a red shirt on. Fact is that they dominated for many years in sports, whether it be football, basketball. Then you see the Franklin High Panthers, They certainly were up there in football and hockey, and the list goes on and on.
There are certain things you can count on in the Hockomock League. You can always count on Mansfield football. They seem to be in the Super Bowl almost every year. You can always count on the Oliver Ames girls going deep into the tournament, because I think the coach is one of the best coaches I've ever seen. She runs a great program, and every year the Oliver Ames girls are there. And then everybody knows about Sharon High tennis. If you're a junior, you're bumped from the team. You're not good enough anymore. And a number of years ago, Sharon High lost the first league match in Hockomock League play in about 15 years. They'd gone undefeated for 15 years in league play. So every town in the Hockomock League has at least one sport that they absolutely dominate in.
And certainly King Philip has been up there recently in some of the sporting competitions. I know that the Warriors have done very well this year in football, basketball, and baseball.
Well, the King Philip team had the third Lehman brother this year, and for those of you who don't know who the Lehman brothers are, they're 6'8" point guards. The oldest of the three is playing basketball down at the University of Maryland. Phenomenal athletes. So they've come a long way in basketball over the last few years.
So if you just joined us, we're talking with Sid Rosen, a fan in the stands. And he's a guy who watches a lot of sports. And we thought that because this is a Sidelines show that we ought to hear from a fan. I'm sure there are other fans out there that would have their personal viewpoint and their opinion how important youth sports is to a youngster and what the role should be of a parent and a volunteer. Because a lot of these youth sports programs wouldn't happen without volunteers. And I think that there's mixed feelings about whether or not a volunteer coach should coach his or her son or daughter, that maybe they should coach other kids instead. But parents have only a certain amount of time between the two jobs that they have to be able to be and travel and drop kids off if they got a number of kids in the family. Time is of the essence. Any advice that you'd like to give to volunteer coaches, Sid, having done this for a number of years?
I think if you're going to be a volunteer coach, you have to really be many things. You have to be a teacher. You have to be a surrogate parent. You have to be able to allow water to roll off your back like a duck, because my biggest concern and complaint about what volunteers have to put up with from parents who don't participate in any way, shape, or form other than to criticize. And it is mind-boggling sometimes some of the things parents do because they think they know better than anybody else. You're not playing my little boy enough minutes. You're not playing him in the right position. He should be batting fourth in the lineup, not eighth. That's the biggest concern. But people need to be more appreciative of the volunteers. They're giving up their free time so that your child can benefit from being able to participate in youth sports. When I was a kid, my father didn't have the time to participate as a volunteer. And so you were lucky if you had enough fathers in the neighborhood to form enough teams so that every kid could play. So people need to be much more respectful of volunteers today.
I think we agree, Sid, that a volunteer coach, whether it be a parent or a non-parent, should know what their role and responsibilities are as volunteer coaches in a youth sports setting. But I think we also agree that volunteer coaches should have specific training so that they can be better prepared to participate in the league, so that they understand the league rules, that they understand the psychology of coaching, that they understand how to provide first aid treatment if a youngster gets hurt, to know the roles and responsibilities that they have. And I think they go hand in hand. We're talking about giving them a little bit of experience to do a better job of teaching. Not just how to play the game, but how to handle the kids and how to be fair and how to make sure that everybody gets equal playing time so that they can participate and to learn how to be part of a team concept. Certainly that's the feeling that I get from many people who have been very successful in coaching. I'm always remembering one coach that volunteered in one of my programs. He went the whole season without winning a game. 12 losses, no wins. But after each game, he took the kids out for an ice cream. The kids adored the coach, not just for the ice cream, but the way he handled them. He made them all feel good. He made them feel important. His name was Cliff Adams, and I always remember that. There were some kids that wanted to quit a team because they didn't win the tournament. There were some kids that didn't like their coach because they didn't get enough playing time. This particular coach played everybody. They all had a chance to participate, and they enjoyed the coach. And I think that's a perfect example of what is it like at the end of a season for a youth volunteer coach. Do the youngsters still have respect for you as a volunteer coach? It's not a question of whether or not you won the tournament. It's really a question of how you were treated as a youngster. And I remember there was a player in our league, Sid, who did a thesis at the college level on what it was like to participate in a second grade basketball program.
Really?
And he talked about how we learned the basic fundamentals and how it was done by a coach who used music to motivate the kids. And how he taught them the fundamentals. They all wore the same jersey, and on the back of the jersey it said respect. How important it is to respect your coach, respect your teachers, the local firefighter, the local police officer, as well as the way you respect your parents and your grandparents and your siblings. So I think there's more to just playing the game, but being able to learn something out of it. His professor at the college did ask that question. What perceived you to want to write this kind of a thesis? And it sounded very interesting, very different. And he said that he was left with a message, and that it was one of the most enjoyable programs that he participated in, and he played all the way up through high school. But he always remembers how he was treated and how everybody was treated the same way. So I think that's a message that we send out to parents and to volunteer coaches. And Sid, we thank you so much as a fan of the game for being here today. And there is room for fans out there to look at the game that's being played regardless of the sport, to evaluate what's going on the court, not just to question the officials who have to maintain a certain level of leadership. But the fact is that even though we've talked to athletes and to coaches and to principals, today we had an opportunity to speak to a fan and to get your perspective, and especially in the youth sports area. I hope that we can send a message out there to the people in our viewing audience, regardless of what town you're from, whether it's Brockton, Sharon, Easton, Foxborough, and certainly Canton. And any final comments that you'd like to make, Sid Rosen?
I would just sum up by saying, enjoy the sports. It's not life or death. There's far more important things in the world today than sports. Use it as a way of getting some recreation and some enjoyment, and remember at all times, especially at the high school and junior high level and the college level, these are kids playing. It's not life or death.
And as someone from the sidelines who's done some broadcasting, of high school games and small college. Coaches coach, players play, and parents parent. And to know what your role and responsibilities might be, and to not cross the line, because there have been some very serious things that have happened that have ended up in court because parents have misused their responsibility as a volunteer coach. So Sid Rosen, we thank you very much.
Thank you. Nice to see you.
For joining us here on Sports Sidelines, and continue to be a fan. And folks, today's cablecast has been a production of ECAT, Eastern Community Access Television. We certainly hope that you enjoyed our show talking to a sports fan and talking about youth sports programs and to talk about people who have grown in the youth sports program and gone on to participate at the high school and college level. Thank you for joining us here on Sports Sidelines. We look forward to Ron Sanders joining me again in our next show. And good luck and enjoy the summer season. Thank you.